We welcome you back to this channel. Today we'll hear 3 stories of creatures and curses in haunted houses, where you'll find the inexplicable in the midst of nature and the paranormal blooms among the shadows of the trees. Go ahead, turn off the lights, and let's take one more step into the world of the unknown.
The creature in the fountain.
It was the first time I stayed at a hotel so far away from civilization. The hotel was an old mansion converted into lodging. Its charm lay in its tranquility, the serenity that emanated from its gardens, and the spectacular views from its balconies. I arrived at the hotel at dusk. The receptionist handed me the key to my room, located on the 2nd floor, with a direct view of the vast back garden. For some reason, I felt drawn to that garden from the moment I saw it, with its well-manicured lawn, tall trees that seemed to whisper to each other, and a maze of shrubs leading to a central fountain. The fountain, despite being in operation, had something unsettling about it. That first night was peaceful, though the wind was strong and I could hear it whistling from inside the room. The next day passed without incident. I strolled through the village, enjoyed the local food, and returned to the hotel late at night. However, that night was different. I decided to go down to the garden. The hotel was silent, with only the occasional creak of the old wood breaking the stillness. The door leading to the garden was slightly ajar. I stepped out into the cold night air and headed toward the garden. The garden was shrouded in shadows. The lights that highlighted the beauty of the place during the day now cast distorted and dark figures. I walked straight to the fountain, drawn by the sound of water, as if I knew something was waiting for me there. As I approached, the air felt heavier. My footsteps echoed strangely on the ground as if I were walking on something hollow. When I finally reached the fountain, I noticed that the water had stopped flowing. Only a dark, murky puddle remained at its base, and then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a shadow cast by the nearby trees, but I soon realized it was something more. It moved between the bushes, a tall, thin figure that slowly emerged. Its body was a black smear, a tangible darkness that seemed to absorb the light around it. I could feel it watching me, its invisible eyes piercing my soul. I couldn't move. It was as if the very ground had trapped me. The figure stopped a few meters from me, silently observing. I felt an extreme cold. My breathing became erratic, and a primal instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't. Suddenly, the figure extended what appeared to be an arm, an elongated, disproportionate limb ending in a twisted hand. It pointed toward the fountain, and my gaze followed the direction it indicated. The water in the puddle began to stir, bubbling as if something beneath the surface was trying to escape. A nauseating stench filled the air, causing me to step back slightly. The water in the fountain started to swirl, and from it emerged a terrifying figure, human-like, with bulging eyes and bluish skin, as if it had been drowning for centuries. The body that followed was equally grotesque, with bones twisted at impossible angles. It was trying to crawl out of the fountain, with skeletal hands gripping the stone edge. At that moment, I knew I had to run, but I was rooted in place, paralyzed with terror. The shadow that had emerged from the bushes moved closer, whispering words I couldn't understand but that resonated in my mind like a curse. I felt the darkness it emanated envelop me, suffocating me, and my vision blurred. The next moment is a blur. Somehow I found the strength to scream, a scream I didn't think I was capable of. When I looked up, the figures were gone, and the fountain had returned to normal as if nothing had happened. I was trembling. I ran back to the hotel, slamming the door behind me. That night, I couldn't sleep. The cold remained in my bones, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw the black figure and the creature that had emerged from the fountain. The next morning, I left the hotel without looking back. I never found out what I saw in that garden, and honestly, I prefer not to know. I only know that since that night, I've had recurring nightmares, always with the same figure watching me from the shadows.
Among the trees.
When I was offered my first job as a gardener at an old mansion on the outskirts of the city, I eagerly accepted. I've always loved plants. The place seemed like an exciting challenge. However, what I experienced there haunts me to this day. The mansion stood at the end of a winding path, surrounded by tall stone walls covered in moss. The garden was overgrown with vegetation. The plants, which must have once been beautiful, were now twisted and covered in black mold. There was something in the air that made me doubt my decision from the very start, but I attributed it to the isolation of the place. On the first day, as I inspected the grounds, I felt a strange discomfort, as if I were being watched. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks with the shadows, but when I crouched down to examine a withered bush, something caught my attention. A movement, a shadow that quickly slid by. Then, I saw it. Among the branches of the trees was a strange creature. Its body was grotesque, covered in rough grayish skin, like a dead tree that had come to life. Its limbs were long and thin, with fingers that ended in sharp, twisted claws. It gave me the impression that it could leap at me at any moment. I blinked, and in an instant, the creature had vanished into the shadows, as if it had never been there. My heart pounded in my chest, but I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it had been an animal, a hallucination caused by exhaustion. I decided not to tell anyone what I had seen. The following days passed in tense normality. I kept myself busy during the day, pruning and clearing the weeds that threatened to overrun the garden, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Every time I passed near the spot where I had seen the creature, my hands trembled, and a chill ran down my spine. I began to hate the garden. More than that, I began to fear it. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, I realized that I had lost track of time. I was so absorbed in my work that I hadn't noticed the darkness starting to envelop the garden. Then, I heard it. A soft creak, like the rustling of dry branches. I turned slowly, and I saw it again. This time, the creature was closer, partially emerging from the bushes, as if it were part of the garden itself. Now I could see its face. It had no human features, just a kind of grimace where its mouth should be. A wide, twisted opening that extended at a strange angle, revealing rows of sharp teeth, like thorns sprouting from within. Its eyes stared at me with an indescribable intensity. The creature moved slowly, its claws scraping the ground as it advanced toward me. The smell it gave off was unbearable, a stench that seemed to seep into my skin. I tried to step back, but my legs wouldn't respond. Terror had paralyzed me. The creature was so close that I could hear its breathing, a harsh, irregular sound, as if every breath was a struggle. When it was just a few meters away, it raised one of its claws, and I saw how its fingers stretched, almost as if they were about to wrap around me. Then, something changed. A sharp sound echoed in the distance, like the creak of a door being suddenly opened. The creature froze, and in a swift movement it slid into the darkness, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. I remained still for a moment, unable to react to everything that had just happened. Then, I ran toward the mansion. My heart was racing, and every shadow I passed seemed to stretch and reach out for me. When I finally reached the door, I slammed it shut, as if that could keep the creature out. The owner was there, looking at me with an expression that combined pity and resignation. In a very low voice, he told me that the garden was cursed. He said that now that the creature knew of my existence, it wouldn't leave me alone. That same night, I quit the job, leaving that place and its curse behind me. But since then, I feel like something is following me. Sometimes, in my dreams, I see those glowing eyes watching me from the darkness, waiting for the right moment to reappear.
The Wail beneath the oak.
Some time ago, I inherited a mansion from a dear aunt. I moved into the property, which was situated in a forgotten corner of the country, surrounded by an immense garden that now lay barren, seemingly deserted for decades. The mansion had an unsettling air about it. The windows were clouded with dust, and vegetation had begun to reclaim the exterior walls. Yet, something drew me to this place. At dusk, I decided to take a walk through the garden. The moon, hidden behind dense clouds, barely illuminated the stone path that wound between overgrown trees and shrubs. The air was heavy with moisture, and each step I took echoed in the stillness of the night. As I walked, a strange sensation began to creep over me, as if something or someone was watching me. I stopped for a moment, but saw nothing except the silhouettes of the trees. I decided to return to the house, feeling a chill run down my spine. That night, I had a nightmare in which I saw a woman, dressed in an old gown worn by time. The woman was in the garden under the faint moonlight, but her face was out of my view. I woke up startled, my heart pounding. The next morning, while having breakfast, I looked out the window towards the garden. The tall, twisted trees cast long, strange shadows. I decided that something needed to be done about the garden. It was too wild, almost alive, as if it concealed secrets beneath its thick vegetation. Days passed, and the garden continued to exert a strange pull on me. Despite my growing fear, I felt the need to explore it further. Each time I entered the garden, I found traces of the life it once held. Old fountains covered in moss, stone paths, and most notably an old iron bench, rusted and hidden beneath a massive oak tree. One afternoon, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. Near the bench, a figure slowly materialized. It was the same woman from my dreams, with her worn dress gently floating. Her face remained a mystery, as a curtain of long black hair covered her features. I wanted to back away, but my legs wouldn't move. The air seemed to have become thick, and I felt as if an invisible force was holding me in place. She approached slowly, and then I saw her face. Her eyes were dark like bottomless pits. Her face bore an expression of infinite sadness, but also of restrained anger, as if her soul was trapped in an endless cycle of suffering. I couldn't scream or move. I just stood there, frozen in time. She extended her hand towards me. It was pale, almost translucent, with long nails. I felt a slight touch on my arm, but that was enough to send a wave of despair through my body. When she finally spoke, it was a faint whisper like the wind through the branches. "You shouldn't have come." The vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving me alone in the garden. I hurried back to the house as fast as I could, unable to stop thinking about what I had seen. The following nights, sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. Her empty eyes, her anguished face, her figure gliding through the garden like a specter of pain. One night, I decided to investigate the history of the mansion further. I found old documents and a photo. There she was, the same woman, though younger and alive. She had been the first owner of the mansion. According to the records, she had died tragically in the garden, drowning in a small pond that was now dry and hidden beneath the overgrowth. After discovering the truth, the woman's presence intensified. I heard whispers at night. The feeling of being watched was constant. And worst of all, the icy cold that lingered, even though it was summer. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to leave, to get away from the mansion and that garden once and for all. Before getting into the car, I glanced back at the garden and saw her there, under the oak tree. She wasn't looking directly at me, but I could feel her sadness and her rage. I never returned to that mansion. I sold it to an unknown buyer, someone who, I hope, doesn't get trapped in the same nightmare I lived through. Sometimes in my dreams, I still see her, wandering through the garden waiting for someone who can free her soul from the darkness.
Thank you for journeying with us through the dark passages of these stories. If you enjoyed them, give us a like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss more tales of terror. Until next time, where fear will once again be your companion.